Story 1. I was homeless a while ago, and my great-grandfather found out. He gave me $50 and said to rent a motel for a week. My heart completely broke. Story 2. An elderly lady once told me, just walk into a company with your resume. Shake the boss's hand, and you'll get the job. Ma'am, they won't even let me past the front desk. Story 3. You won't be happier at work if we pay you more. But we need to understand why workplace happiness is so low. This perspective comes from someone who earned 10 times my salary and was born into wealth. Story 4. My elderly professor told me I shouldn't worry about student loans because, in her day, she paid for college by working summers as a waitress. However, those $80,000 in debt will definitely not be covered by my summer job at Denny's. Story 5. My grandpa told my dad to tell me never to bring my Chinese boyfriend to his house for holidays or dinners. He mentioned my great-uncle, his brother, being a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II as his reason for disliking Asians. My dad explained that the boyfriend was Chinese, not Japanese. Grandpa replied, "It's the same thing. All Asians came from China. That's where they all originated." Story 6. In Southern California, my aunt, who heard we still rent, suggested, "You don't have to buy a new home. Just get yourself a $200,000 starter home and fix it up." I responded, "Starter homes that need fixing up in Los Angeles start at around $1.2 million. Story 7. I work 6 days a week and 7 days a week from November to Christmas Eve from 8 to 6 and I do overtime. However, it seems that I do not work hard enough, which is why I cannot afford to buy a home. Story 8. My generation is often seen as easily offended. However, your generation was also offended when a black person drank from the same water fountain as you. Story 9. My parents are in their 80s and are great at this. I'm sure I can think of better examples, but a recent one comes to mind. I'm 6 months pregnant. Prior to getting pregnant, I had some blood pressure issues, so I'm being closely monitored for preeclampsia, but no problems so far. My mom suggested that maybe I shouldn't be working. Sure, Mom. Are you going to give me thousands of dollars so I can afford not to? I'm a nurse and she was too. She quit when she started having kids, but that was in 1976, and their ranch on 300 acres was paid for in cash. Story 10. In my previous company, I broke up with my boyfriend, and an older male Cuban coworker overheard me discussing it with a female coworker. He suggested that maybe this was a sign I should date a woman since I had never dated one. I responded, asking what if his wife wasn't the love of his life since he had never been with a man. He walked away and never revisited the topic. Story 11. The key to success is to work hard, just as if I have not been doing so. Like Grandpa, you bought a 300-acre farm for about $1,000, which, even adjusted for inflation, was affordable on a single income at the time. Story 12. An older lady at the grocery store told my husband and me that she thinks her grandson is autistic because he is one of those test tube babies. She suggested that his parents should let her brother deal with him while they leave the room. How do you go from complimenting my son to this nonsense before I could even say thank you? Story 13. If you are unwell, then you are unwell. Your workplace will understand. You cannot go in and teach when you are unwell. Story 14. It's been about 20 years since she passed away, but my brother-in-law's elderly great-aunt moved in with his parents when she began to develop Alzheimer's disease. When my brother-in-law's parents would travel, which was often, I was the go-to person for staying with the great-aunt and making sure she took her medications, ate proper meals, and had company. This was mostly because she had a tendency to be a bit ornery, and for whatever reason, I was one of the only people she liked who was willing to help out. She was a self-made millionaire, having grown up on a sand farm in rural Wisconsin in the early 1900s. She was frugal, and along with her husband, she started a business, made smart investments, and was still very thrifty even long after they had accumulated substantial wealth. For example, they used to go to the city dump to gather all the discarded leftover house paint, mix it together, and whatever shade of gray resulted from that blend was the color they chose to repaint their house. They could have easily afforded the highest quality paint and paid a professional, but they preferred to do things themselves and didn't see the point in spending money on what they could get for free. I was a young, single woman when I cared for her, and she apparently thought I could use some adventure and advice. She encouraged me to travel the world and see as much of it as I could, but she said there was no sense in paying for it because such experiences could be had for free. How? Her advice was to start a relationship with a married man. The wealthier, the better, because they would go out of their way to ensure that no one they knew would see them with a mistress, which meant travel. That's how I got to visit the Vatican with Pete, she pointed out proudly. Apparently, Pete was a wealthy married man she had an affair with when she was 19, and in their small town, he was a prominent member of the Greek Orthodox Church. People in town referred to him as Pete the Greek. I have no idea how many other Petes there were, but nearly everyone she talked about from her early life had unique designations that typically involved their first name and some distinguishing feature about them. She had a whole slew of travel tales from the flapper era, courtesy of her signature travel hack, so I guess Pete kept her busy when she was in her late teens and early 20s before she married the man with whom she built her empire. I never used this particular piece of advice but mentioned the stories she told me to her relatives when they returned from their travels, and they confirmed a lot of the information. Although some specifics were unknown to them, they said it seemed to align with what they knew of their great-aunt's younger years. Story 15. To my father. You let your daughters study abroad? I would never. They would just marry foreigners and never come home. Story 16. At your age, I was already in command of 100 people. Well, good for you for taking over the family business. Story 17. If you believe a chief executive officer is not a good fit for your agency's culture, it is your responsibility to inform them. Story 18. Many boomers believe that everyone is earning between $70,000 and $90,000, which is a misconception shared by more individuals than you might expect. A simple internet search reveals that the average single income ranges from $35,000 to $40,000, depending on the state. Story 19. My grandma used to ask me if I had a pension every time my job came up in conversation. She could not understand that pensions basically no longer exist except for unionized positions and the military. Story 20. My grandma was married 4 times to very wealthy men. She didn't care much for any of them, but she did love money. She would always say to me, "Darling, you can have whatever you want from a man. You just have to be willing to show them how far you will go." Honestly, to this day, I don't really know what she meant by that statement, but as I get older, I'm beginning to understand. Story 21. Pull up your bootstraps, stop buying coffee every day, and save money. You will have a house in no time. Boomers do not realize that houses are no longer priced at $1,500, and the cost of living is 300% higher than when they bought their homes. Story 22. Mildly amusing, but sometimes when my grandparents tell me a secret or something not everyone should know, they say, "Don't go sharing this on Facebook." Mom, I haven't posted on Facebook in the last decade, and I doubt my return will be about a distant relative's divorce. Story 23. A few months ago, my mom came to visit. While she was sitting on my couch, she screamed at me in front of my children, ages 7 and 10, that men can't help it when raping women because they are visual creatures. She defended this idea by saying it's free will for a man to abuse women while arguing that women shouldn't be allowed to have abortions because it's not the baby's fault. What about a woman's free will to choose? The more I disagreed with her, the louder she became. I had a long discussion with my children about how and why her views were incredibly wrong, how consent absolutely matters, and that men are fully capable of controlling themselves. I was shocked, and since then, she hasn't had access to me or my children. It's also important to note that my brother had a sex offender charge, which was dropped when he moved to a different state, and my mom defended him the entire time, blaming the woman for his actions. I told her, "One sex offender in the family is more than enough." Story 24. Whenever we attended a family wedding, my aunt always poked fun at me, saying, "Oh, you'll be next, my love." So I started doing the same at family funerals. Story 25. I lived in the Northeast and knew someone who was of Dutch descent. Her grandmother would sometimes speak suspiciously about the English. The English took over from the Dutch in this area in 1645, I think. I wasn't certain what she meant the first time I heard it. Story 26. You are in your 30s, so you probably have about $20,000 in your savings. My elderly manager discussed making a down payment on a house. Story 27. I am 58 years old. The most out-of-touch comment I have received from someone my age is, "I voted for Trump." It's strange to feel the same age as those who are considered old. Story 28. Our baby was born with a tongue tie, and nobody could understand why he was losing so much weight despite our frequent attempts to breastfeed him. He couldn't latch on. By the time we figured it out, her breast milk was no longer coming in. So it was formula or we would lose him. A few weeks later, in the checkout line, we were buying 2 cans of baby formula. An elderly man said, "Breast milk is best." I should have confronted him. We were exhausted and dumbfounded instead. Story 29. You should find a job that pays for your health insurance and provides a retirement plan. You do not want to work for yourself. I have owned my business for 12 years and pay for my own insurance, including medical, dental, vision, disability, and life. I have an excellent reputation and plan to grow my business. This was stated by someone I have been working with for all of those 12 years. Story 30. For years, I was told by my older relatives, "Have you considered just buying a house?" Yeah, sure. Let me just quickly withdraw tens of thousands for a down payment and manifest a house that meets my family's needs at an affordable price right now. The same people also kept telling me I could easily find a much cheaper apartment of the same size, so I showed them the market for what I had. Maybe they should do their research before lecturing me. Story 31. My in-laws told me I was foolish for not marrying someone wealthy like the other women in the family. The man I love isn't good enough for them, so they want to ruin everything for him. Story 32. She's not that old, but I casually mentioned to my mom that girls have an easier time getting a boyfriend if they want than the other way around, and she said that was absolutely ludicrous. It was a small thing, but I was surprised by her reaction since we mostly agree on everything. Story 33. The older person saying, "I've been around longer than you have. I've seen a thing or two." Seems to be trying to prove a point or just rambling because they want to be heard. Story 34. My evil step-grandma used to compare me to her grandkids all the time. I worked at a YMCA daycare at the time and came home excited that I had received my teaching license. She told me to wait until I had a good job like her grandkids who worked at Subway. Story 35. Not old but middle-aged men love ranting to me about transgender people. I'm transgender. I can't tell if they constantly rant about transgender individuals or if they specifically rant to me because they know I'm transgender, or if they think I'm safe to rant to because I'm young and clearly not, to them, transgender. The number of times I've told someone, "You're talking to the wrong person," or "I'm transgender and really don't want to hear this," or "You keep saying how loud transgender people are and how little you care, but you're literally the one yelling, and I've not once in all 10 minutes of knowing you said a single thing about being transgender," is insane. Do you not care? Then be quiet. My employer was doing this to me, and it was very clear he didn't know my identity. He was ranting about the sweetest person in town who happens to be transgender and never talks about it because she's trying hard to pass. He just kept repeating that he doesn't care about transgender individuals but believes they need to be more quiet and should go back into the closet and stop making noise about it. He was, of course, yelling all of this. Sometimes I want to confront someone with their own irony. I forgot I'm a target for transphobia. Yes, keep down voting. How original. Story 36. Struggling to find a job. My mother faced difficulties paying the loan after my father passed away. It was a very challenging time. I broke up with my girlfriend after I thought I had aced an interview, but they ended up giving the job to someone else. She got upset with me, telling me I couldn't always be sad. She wanted romance and other people were unemployed too, but I had to be happy in my relationship. Story 37. Back in 2016, when I had a Friday off, an older woman in an elevator told me, "Maybe if Donald Trump gets elected, everyone will have Fridays off." Story 38. It wasn't a specific thing but rather an expression of disbelief that their grandchildren, now ages 17 and 18, are facing a dismal economy and their buying power is very low. Story 39. I received £1 from my grandmother not too long ago to buy yourself some sweets from the shop. I'm 30, and it's impossible to find any sweets or even a bag of crisps in the shop for under £1. 25 years ago, you could, but not now. Story 40. An old client gave me a 20-cent tip in red coins and said, "You'll buy yourself a coffee with that. You're in the cheapest bar in town, and the coffee you just paid for is €1.30. Story 41. I was riding my bike through the pedestrian area of my town a few years ago. An older man asked me what I would do if I won $1 million, and I told him I would almost be able to buy a house in the area. He was nice, and I was polite. But sorry, $1 million doesn't go that far around here anymore. Story 42. Just eat less food and exercise. I have polycystic ovary syndrome. It doesn't exactly work that way, even if I'm starving myself. Story 43. Confiding in an elderly friend about my terrible marriage issues with my drug-addicted husband. She replied, "Oh, honey, take a pill." Story 44. About a year ago, I was being stalked by an ex-boyfriend. When I told my mom about it, she mentioned that his refusal to give up would have been seen as endearing in the past. I disagreed, stating that it is harassment. Story 45. You don't know what it's like to lose a parent. My father lost his mother when he was 61. I was 18 when my mother died. Story 46. My recent election is a mandate to completely reverse a horrible betrayal and all the betrayals that have taken place. Story 47. My stepmother recently asked me why I haven't paid off my mortgage yet. I have owned my house for 7 years. Story 48. I believe I'm going to hell for my hand tattoos, and I had to complete an internship with the police. I never wanted to be a police officer, but I was often told that I was too pretty for the role. It's confusing. Story 49. I remember this old-timer going on television and telling everyone that they didn't need anything more than a double-barrel shotgun for home defense. If anything happens, just go out on your balcony and fire a couple of shots into the air. Story 50. More so, it is out of touch with reality. I once had an argument with a racist family member who said, "We built this country." I told him that immigrants are the ones who built this country, and he looked me in the eyes and asked, "Who made them?" Racism is out of touch, but this response seemed to lack rational or complex thought, extending beyond mere racism. Story 51. I often find myself in the role of the older person who expresses opinions that may seem out of touch. However, I am active every day and aware of the negative impact that excessive phone use and social media can have. Many people are influenced by others and struggle to accept reality. While I may not fully understand the difficulties some have in socializing, taking responsibility for their actions, or dealing with their peculiar addictions, I remain unconcerned. I will continue to express my thoughts openly. Story 52. That is great news, my aunt said when I told her that my homeless, mentally ill sister had been found wandering the streets. It was her son, my nephew, who found her. He said her face was bruised and that she was really thin. Yes, great news indeed. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.